Okay, this is the first morning of the first day of several days that I will spend at the Angkor Wat complex, which is huge. In the lower middle is this, just above where it says Sunset Bar, is Siem Reap, the town that you visit, the anchor town for this complex. I took the slowest possible tuk that I could probably have lucked out to get here. The only thing faster than us, the only thing slower than us, was a bicycle or a person walking or someone dead. But at any rate, where I am now, here is Angkor Wat. That's, I'm going to save for a later day probably. Here is Angkor Thom. This is where I'm at. Where I'm specifically at is right in here. In the course of the next several days, I'll be visiting this area here in several temples, then Angkor Wat, of course. These that are circled, and then this Rolus group down here. Okay, now we're on the map of Angkor Thom, just that one section that you saw. That's this whole map here. Where we are right now is right here somewhere. And this is the Terrace of the Elephants, this long, narrow thingy that you see. That's what we're going to be looking at. Where it gets its name will be obvious. Right now you can see the trunks of 6 elephants. And as I slowly pan around, I'm going to read from the Lonely Planet guidebook. This is the Terrace of the Elephants, 350 meters long, decorated with parading elephants towards both ends. Okay, so right now you can see there's 2 elephants facing each other. This was used as a giant viewing stand for public ceremonies and served as a base for the king's grand audience hall. First thing that's absolutely necessary to keep in mind in looking at anything to do with Angkor Wat is it's not one building, it's not one complex, it's not one site. Therefore, anything you look at cannot be consumed like an entire dinner in one gulp. You can try to get a sense of it, which I'm going to do as I pan through here, and then try to break it down in elements, and then from there build up in your mind a sense of the awesome magnitude of this. Versailles is impressive and big, but it is one big unit. Oh, a couple of small buildings, but basically that's it. This is not that at all. Now you're going to discover this just as I am. This was the center of the right and the north and south ends, if you will, of this huge terrace. So let's climb up and take a look. We'll look at the detail sometime later, I think. Okay, let's take a quick look at the detail. On each side you've got one lion sitting out in front here, and then to the right you've got nagas. Remember, the nagas are the snake-like goodies that we saw going up the banister or the railings of most of the wihans at the temples in Thailand. Considerable amount of crossover between the architecture, etc. This would be a 5-headed cobra if it were fresh and new. The detail here, it looks like humans or some form that's humanoid, kinda. They have clawed feet, blah blah blah, holding up the terrace. Notice that we're looking at least 1, 2, 3, 4 levels that I can see. So let's climb up and take a look. Now this is where travel is creative. It is an art form. You have to try to figure out what it looked like when it was brand new. Now this has some kind of an animal head to it. Lion or whatever, I don't know. Is it a female breast? I don't know. Or chest? I don't know. Female hips? I don't know. And then of course the feet. Okay, we're climbing up to the 2nd level here. Notice some more figures that are holding up this terrace level. What this big block is or was, I don't know. A pedestal for a specific monument or statue. Notice the nagas. perimetering all of these terraces. Okay, a third, a fourth tiny one, and then a fifth one where that gentleman up there is standing. Here, notice that we've got holes dug into there and some lines going like this. My guess is that those grooves and those holes were designed to secure some kind of a statue that was placed on them. Right off the bat, it's fairly obvious that this complex, and probably all of these, has been reassembled over time in an effort to provide some kind of quasi-restoration. Even here there's looks like a chunk of rebar that was used to hold these pieces together at some point in time. Notice the fine detail of these stones that have been reinstalled here. Okay, this fifth terrace level is in the form of an X, as you can see. No doubt the king would have stood somewhere here at the apex of it, my guess. Were these walls and those terrace areas, and this huge whatever it is in front of us. Did the king come through there and mount this? Imagine how impressive these walls would have looked when new. Of course, they would have been incredibly overshadowed by everything else we're looking at. Okay, now time for another grand pan, because we need to get a perspective. Why did the king build this whole thing? He built it for this reason. Out in front, where I'm panning now, is this huge parade ground or central square. You can see the huge monument structures over there, probably individual temple type buildings or structures. And in front here was where great parades would be held. So you'd have horses and chariots and elephants and all their regalia of armament, of power, just like you'd get in when the Russians did their parade of missiles. And the same with any other country that does that pomp and circumstance to aggrandize itself. So as we look down this terrace at these lower terrace levels, where probably lesser nobility, but certainly nobility, would be arrayed, probably in accordance with their level of nobility, determined on which terrace they got to stand and how close to the wall and how close to the king. So just imagine that we could slip back in time to the moment when the king is having one of his great don't you just love me experiences. And here he is on some kind of a throne with a golden diadem, whatever that is. I suspect it's a crown of some sort made out of gold, surrounded by mandarins, whatever they were, and maidens. That I understand. Umbrellas and big huge feathered things to keep him cool and shaded. Tremendous amounts of noise, probably elephants bellowing, music of some sort playing. Drums are absolutely necessary in a military context. As we pan through here, that's what you're seeing. Probably the huge throngs of people arrayed either beneath us here or off to the sides of this huge temple complex. Was this available to the common person? Good question. Okay, I'm going to start from the center and work to the left and see what kind of detail there is, and then I'll go from the center and work to the north. And notice that there's walls here, appear to be walls, or the remnants of them, and even here. So maybe there were additional structures in front of this huge terrace. What I'm going to look for now is specific detail that is particularly sharp in its preservation, like this one. Notice here that the differences in the terrace, as seen from this side, necessitated two different sized beams, if you will. And how dramatic this would be on the corner. Now this is a outside corner, which means it's a 270 degree, I think it is. 270 degree relief sculpture, if you will, because it's just a little bit more than 180 degrees, because it's just that little bit of corner. Could these be viewing stands for lesser nobles or lesser people in function? Okay, now we start to get some elephants. Here, one elephant at the corner. Elephants on each of reliefs on the faces. And here are the 6 we saw earlier. One thing that I noticed right off were the holes that have been drilled into some of the stones, but not all. And not all in all places. Did they serve some kind of random function? Like there's 2 there on the top of that trunk, but none on these except one little square one there. Here it's pretty obvious that that hole probably served as a support mechanism for a tusk. Maybe they had a piece of metal in there. Maybe there's a piece of metal embedded in the one on the left that we can't see. This is interesting. On the top of this elephant relief remains what may well be a soldier holding a spear. And then notice the floral, perhaps reflecting the jungle environment. Okay, here that same character, and definitely with some kind of a spear, but notice it looks like it has a hook on it at the lower right there, like it's barbed. Here a little bit better floral motif. And why this individual down beneath here? Just another minion taking care of the elephant, or? And here the trunk of a plant going up. Here it looks like 2 warriors at least on top of this elephant. Here it looks like some little critter crawling up a trunk of a tree or of a vegetation of some sort. Here a little bit better view of these warriors on top. Notice we can see some of the strapping that holds the armament or whatever on the elephant. But why the holes? What were they attaching to this? Were they attaching pieces of metal to make it look like part of the armament of the elephant? Now we're getting more information. Notice this elephant has one of their cattle, I think, or a deer or something with horns in its trunk. Obviously in control of that. The elephant to the left has another such animal, but his trunk wrapped around the hindquarters of that animal. What does that symbolize? What did it symbolize? Here we're a little more detail for putting together this composite in our mind. Notice it looks like rope that comes down along the left side or the back of this left elephant. It'll go underneath the tail to hold on whatever the soldiers are probably standing on. Notice we can see this sword or knife or whatever it is in much better detail. And here it looks like the elephant had a bell, so there would have been the clanging of bells as the elephants moved about, adding to the noise level and probably the fear level of giant elephants coming at you in battle. Okay, more detail. Is that the ear of the elephant or some part of the armor? Notice we can see another rope that's going underneath the belly of the elephant. Okay, now I may be at the center point of this part of the terraced wall, because this looks like some kind of a being. Notice his face is pointing to the right. His right arm and fist are held up above his head. Notice there are a couple of small characters above. Would these be indicative of defeated enemies? Oftentimes in many cultures made much, much smaller than the victor. Here again, the elephant holding on in a different way to this particular animal. It's obviously, or looks like it's obviously dead, just hanging there. It almost seems as though the graphics are getting more complex as we work our way down to the left here. Here's a man poised on the back of the elephant, but considerably larger in size than the warrior at the front. Why? And who's this character in the middle, just suspended on the tree? And maybe these small characters we see are just monkeys. Perhaps that's what we're looking at here. And here a bird in the foliage. And this whole section of the wall that I'm approaching now seems to be in far greater detail, as though it were somehow over the centuries better protected. Notice we can see the characters on the elephant in considerable detail. Here we see an intersection of the ropes that held the platform for the warriors on top. Here's some nice fine detail. It looks like it was either cleaned up or protected in that particular spot. Here it looks like several arrow points, perhaps from a quiver of arrows that man held somehow. Some of these individual stones have so much detail and seem so out of context in the wall that they're in that you wonder if they weren't recently carved. But I don't think so. This section of wall was obviously a temporary reconstruct. Now I'm at the far southern end. Notice these beehives, almost like Mormon beehives. So even if you were stationed down here somehow and the king was way up there in the middle, you still couldn't have felt like you were too badly shuffled off. In fact, from this viewpoint, what a spectacular spectacle, redundant. All of this would have made from this perspective. Were I the king, I think I would have been deprived had I not slipped down here for a view. Now here appears to be an earlier, or another wall within this wall. Whether this was original or just a reconstruct, it looks original, but whether it was open like this originally, or whether it reflects that this was the outer wall was an expansion of this original wall, I don't know. Some pretty detail on this wall of an upper terrace. Very Indian, and I don't know why I say that, except that it just seems in my brain that this is very Indian. Now the fact that this is Indian should not be considered an idle reflection on my part. In fact, this entire culture was dominated in its very early history by India, used principally from Indian traders who came to this area initially and then influenced it as a result. And here at the back of the temple we have this beautiful wall. I am assuming it's associated with this terrace. This is the very south end of the terrace, what remains of it. Who would have been allowed to stand on this lower but middle terrace? Remember, at one time, Angkor Wat, some portion of it, held over 1 million people, when at the same time, London held 50,000. Notice that just a short distance from that main entrance to this terrace, and recessed back a little bit, is this second entrance, and then a considerable distance down to the next entrance onto the platform. Had to have some great significance. And my guess is that this huge tree lived its life, blasted a hole through that wall, died since this was at its peak. What was this inner courtyard used for? Perhaps intermission munchies or something? And notice that these railings were apparently open. rather than solid walls, which is interesting. This is that center portion at the back, just a closer view. It was a profound and elaborate entrance, an exit way for the king, no doubt.
Hello.
And look at this niche that held reliefs and little columns. Imagine that one man could marshal the power and the authority, not to mention economic resources, to construct this, to reflect his power throughout this region. And perhaps that's the reason that governments seem so inclined to build their giant, majestic buildings, sometimes majestic, except in the case of the communists, is to, in their minds, reflect power to the rest of the world. Now inside here, these are interconnecting doorways. Did priests or others hang out in these rooms? Was this a dressing room for the king? Look at the design here, and it's consistent. The groove, then a broader, wider groove. And what did these holes contain? What was their purpose? Were there statues in these niches here, framing the doorways? Even from behind, this was impressive. But I suppose if it's the entryway of the king, it has to be impressive. And the view of the king, as he perhaps approached this way, if he did, walking perhaps on these very steps that I'm walking on now, would he have seen then his platform and his retinue waiting for him? Perhaps like Elton John before he entered one of his great concerts, or Michael Jackson or Elvis. Is that what they feel? Is that what they sense? And what was the symbolism of these niches above that door and the one behind me? And why would the king endure these big steps, the upper two? Why didn't he have a ramp built? Imagine how pretty this entrance, this curved lower step would have been when it was new. And here these holes, large holes and the supporting holes around it, supporting perhaps a large statue of the king himself. Now we'll take a closer look at the front end of this north half of the terrace of the elephants. When I see complexes like this, edifices to the power of one man, what I consider is the amount of economic value that was basically stolen from the people with their labor, with their resources, to aggrandize this one man. I see the same thing in Obama and in the Democratic Party's stimulus pork barrel atrocity. How much did they waste on behalf of their petty, political, corrupt goals? Here the detail of the railing banister. It appears that the same motif is duplicated on the north side, which makes sense, symmetrically speaking. Now, one consequence of this second close entry, if you will, entry stairs to the terrace, is the shift in motif from the man or the being type thing to the elephants. Here, detail I hadn't noticed before, and that is some kind of being upside down on the bottom of this elephant's trunk. All I'm looking for now is the hint of more detail. Now, this west-facing wall has great detail, so we'll take a real close look at it. I'm going to pan first the whole wall, top to bottom. And now I'm going to focus on the upper and lower panels. So here certainly we have armed men on horseback. And are these two opposing forces, the left side and the right side? Can't be sure. Again, what were the holes for? Something went in there. Now it's typical in friezes like this, particularly with their battle associated, to show the victor in their most powerful positions and then the victims having something horrible done to them. So what we saw initially was perhaps the king riding in his chariot. But can we see any evidence of torture or of beheading like you'd certainly see with the Mayans? I can't make anything out. It does look down here like those are umbrellas perhaps that people are carrying. Detail at the bottom of this elephant trunk simply seems to be floral, perhaps even those lotus blossom buds. Here's a little bit nicer detail of the terrace level that the beings are holding up. Now this is interesting. Perhaps this is more original than the south end, but notice very, very steep staircases. My guess is those were for the peons. Here very much evident this floral arrangement at the bottom of the, or actually ensconcing the lower portion of the trunks of these elephants.